All right. Welcome, everyone. Cutting off conversations is the worst part. I think we're right at 6, so if we want to gather around the table, and welcome everyone. What's that? No, you're fine. You're fine. There's no wrong or right.
Yeah, last night to let me back in. I left my cell phone up there.
Oh, no.
And I got about 2 blocks away and was calling my wife and the car says, hook up a phone.
I was up in my office.
I should have called you, right?
All right. Well, welcome everyone. Oops. I don't think we need an AI companion. I'm going to say deny, but just because I don't quite know what that is. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. This is our 4th and final official climate team meeting as a big group, but we'll talk also about some upcoming events or meetings that are planned to kind of continue as we switch over towards the final public event and then Planning Commission. I imagine we don't need a round of introductions. I'm Katie, if you had forgotten, and John Phillips here from Parametrics. We also have from our team, Beth Miller, who's going to be presenting a little bit at the beginning of the meeting, also with Parametrics, but down in Oregon. So she's Zooming in tonight. And then Marcus from Makers is supporting notes, but also on Zoom. So we'll tee you up. So our agenda tonight, not much housekeeping or much, that was pretty much the welcome. I don't think much housekeeping. We're going to talk a little bit about, before we get into the goals and policies, greenhouse gas emission reduction targets discussion, and kind of give you some background on how we're approaching that and what we understand currently is required, and just those considerations. And Beth is going to be kind of spearheading that part of the conversation. But the real focus tonight is just to go through the draft goals and policies that we shared last week, and just kind of get your thoughts. I've seen people, I know people have been in the document online, which is great. You're welcome to do that a little bit after tonight's meeting too. But just wanted to kind of walk through to make sure folks are clear. And we're also going to be talking, the climate element is a little unique in that it is, it touches all the other elements. And so in the tracker, the list is what we'll be going through tonight, but this tracker kind of gives a sense when we said cross-references of ways that we're going to be linking out to the other elements. And we'll talk a little bit as we go through the list of there may be some goals and policies that actually are going to shift to other elements and just be referenced from the climate element. So we're still kind of figuring all that out as we kind of develop the list, but we'll get into more details on that as we go. So goals are really just to discuss those two things. So yeah, I won't go through all the past meetings, but you see those there. So this is our 4th meeting. I wanted to make sure you're all aware that we're going to have the final public open house on March 20th. So we've set that date, and that it'll be similar to the rest of the open houses. We will have we're working out all the materials, but we'll have boards that kind of share not the specific goals and policies, but the goal kind of areas, some of the key things, and get an opportunity to gather some feedback from people as to like what things are they most supporting, most excited about as part of this process. So that will be some good feedback to have going into the Planning Commission meetings, which are going to be March, April, so picking up right after that open house. And I'm not sure if those dates have officially been set. We have sort of dates tentatively earmarked, but I'll let Libby communicate when those are final and official. So we encourage you to attend both of those, even though this is our last climate team meeting. We would love to see you both at the open house and then obviously at Planning Commission meetings to see those discussions. Any questions about that? And we're also happy to kind of send email updates as things kind of evolve. Any key feedback that we hear from the open house you want to share with this group. I know you may want to just be informed of what we have heard at those kind of things. So we're happy to kind of send some updates during that process if there's interest in that. We've really appreciated the involvement of this group throughout the, yeah. Oh yeah. And I think it's just that.
I know there was some subgroup discussion such as with business and industry. Is that going to be summarized or shared with the broader, with the team and then with the community in some way?
For reminding me, sorry, I might cut out for a second there. Yes, it was a small meeting, but a great conversation. We have kind of summary notes underway, and we need to get those over. I think we shared them internally, and I just have been slow to get those over to you. So yes, we will get those over. But yeah, it was not a huge attendance, but a really good focused discussion. We had the port there, some industry representatives, and local business representatives. So Libby, anything you want to say specifically to that since you attended? Yeah. Yeah, and thank you for the reminder on that. We've been focused on goals and stuff lists, so we'll get
I
there.
found it real interesting, the maritime one, to learn more about the industry and what goes on here in Anacortes and along the waterfront.
Yeah, awesome. All right, so with that, Beth, I think I'm going to switch it over to you, and you can just say next slide when you want me to advance slides, and I'll turn off my mic here.
Sure. All right. So we're just going to take you a little bit quickly through what you've seen before. So this is a previous version of the sort of future projections of Anacortes' emissions. I've been working on these kinds of things with a lot of other communities, and so have made some improvements to yours as well. Just it's a fun little bonus. So if we could flip on to the next slide. All right, so here's sort of a new figure that sort of breaks down where all the decreases actually come from at this sort of state, mostly state at this point, regulations. There's a little bit of a difference in that the electricity emissions now go out to 2045, which is where they should have been before, because that's the point at which utilities are regulated to be at net zero. So there was a mistake in there having them at net zero at 2040, but looks more or less the same. And what I want to highlight here, so is that there's a lot of work that the state is doing, right? A lot of work that these state regulations are doing to bring down emissions across a bunch of different sectors. The Clean Energy Transformation Act, the electricity emissions reduction, it's doing a lot of work for you. Especially considering that PSE has a lot of emissions to reduce. But what I want you to note in this is what is left over, which is mostly natural gas and then diesel and all the other sort of transportation kinds of fuels. So what the state wants us to do is to set some targets for what we would like to aim for in terms of greenhouse gas emissions through time. That sort of big black line there is the net zero. So that's what it would look like if emissions were on track to go to zero by 2050, which is sort of the safety date of, avoiding if everybody can do this, we will avoid hopefully the very worst impacts of climate change. So the state of Washington wants to try to do its part to get there. Yeah, so as you can see, there's definitely work to still be done. Are there any questions on this figure before we move on to targets? Okay, well, if you think of any more, let me know. Okay, so like you saw, the ones that we want our targets to focus on things that you can actually control in the city. So for example, things like what kind of emissions are associated with your buildings. That's a lot of that natural gas footprint is just heating houses, heating businesses. That's where a lot of that is. And then there's still some transportation emissions left over. So there's even with the electric vehicle mandates, there's still some transportation emissions there to take care of. So supporting that transition to electric vehicles and some of that we can electrify the city's fleet, for example, and sort of lead by example. In the measures that you will sort of look through and dissect and give your opinions on, we've included other things to support coordination. So like I said, a lot of the heavy lifting is being done by greening the grid, right? So it's by, putting things onto electricity and making that electric grid greener, lower emissions. So it's really important that we make sure that our electric utility can still provide all the power that we need. So there's a lot of measures in there that are focused on making that transition seamless and resilient and all of those things. And then the port itself and the ferries are all also doing work to try to decrease their own emissions. And that's not directly under the control of Anacortes, obviously. But it is, but you can be partners in helping them do that. So these measures will go a good way towards getting the city to meet its goals, but right, it's sort of things like what is your home, like what fuels are heating your home are things that individual community members are really responsible for at foundationally. So so that is something that is just going to need to be part of the messaging and part of talking to people is what individuals role in this is. And the other thing is there are emissions there that are going to be really hard to address, or we don't quite know how we're going to address it with current technology or current abilities. So there's, we know how to heat things to like room temperature without natural gas, but there's some industrial uses of natural gas, like really high heat things that are hard to do. And also, things like long haul trucking, while there's a lot of innovation there, it's not quite there yet to sort of hang your hats on decreases there. So we may need to revise in the future to take advantage of changes in technology. Okay, next. Oh, this is a little bit of a stub, but so what I want to think about is what is important to consider in identifying near-term targets, like what do we want to think about, what we can do, and think about what that difference between what we think we can do and where we need to be to get to 2050 is going to be a stubborn problem. So how can we continually adjust our emissions reductions downward?
Beth, I'm just going to stop here just to make sure, just because there's a lot of
Yeah.
text, and I'm going to actually go back to this graphic and just make sure folks are tracking. So we know what the end goal is, right? The 2050 goal for net zero. Commerce has guidance about setting interim targets of what the city hopes to achieve by, say, 2035, the next time you're doing an update to the comprehensive plan. And Commerce guidance suggests that that's a strategy a lot of people do, or a lot of communities can do. And it's something that Anacortes did with the 2006, I believe, inventory, where you set some interim targets. So we're wanting to have just a little discussion, first of all, to make sure if we're still kind of confirming what's actually required in this area with commerce. It's definitely in the guidance to set targets. So one question to this group is it important to set an interim target? The final target, 2050, is set by the state, but is it valuable to set an interim goal for this group? And is that something you want to see? And then the other piece of it was just what Beth was just talking about. Should we just basically look to the line to sort of say by 2035, you want to be reducing here? And then, or do we want to really look more closely at the measures we have and focus on that, knowing that the emissions that we have, some are more challenging than others. And so what are the focus on in the near term, these goals where the city really does have direct control, focus on those and set targets for those areas first, and then kind of support that. Yeah. And Beth, is that anything you do add to that?
Yeah, no, I think that was a really good explanation. Thank you.
All right. So the problem for me looking at that graph as someone who orders fleet vehicles is what am I supposed to do to reach a goal by 2028 or 2030? I mean, am I supposed to have 75% of my fleet electrified? Am I supposed to change natural gas in all of our facilities or just half of them? So that would help us understand to set actual targets and then talk to council about we need X to get to this number. So that perhaps other people understand that graph, but I don't understand it in those terms.
Yeah, so that's a really good question is what, so there's what would it take, right? What would it take to get emissions down to the line? And you can see that there's like sort of lots of different sectors that could lots of different moves that you could make to get us there. And so, for example, when you're talking about your purchasing fleet of diesel trucks, and I've sat in on a couple rulemaking sessions where they're talking about rules regarding electric trucks, and what I keep hearing is that it's not quite there yet, the technology. So if people need to buy a truck this year, they can't get the engines that they need in an electric version. So, that's why we're talking about sort of revising our goals through time. There are things that are easy to address and the technology is there. So for example, natural gas heating, that's like technologically very possible and lots of people are doing it. But I think one good way to approach this is ask, what does it take? Like, what would it take to get each sector to where it needs to be? And then understand what portion of that and at what time scale that might be possible.
Sorry, kind of related, but you also asked about interim goals and benchmarks and things like that. It's my opinion. It's like when I look at this, it's all conceptual. So kind of like what John was saying, having a specific measurable goal, obviously as we actually implement things into policy, something small to pick at, but also when we set a goal, a big goal for 20 years from now, we're all humans and we don't put a lot of, we'll do it next year or we'll do it, 3 years from now. But if instead we broke it down into, 5-year increments, and in 5 years, we're going to be 50% of our small fleet will be electric or whatever those benchmarks are. I do think it's important if we're serious and want to make progress that we set short-term goals and not leave everything at the 20 or even 10-year mark. Opinion.
Because we still need that number to have a discussion. So should I change out my facilities to heat pumps, electric, and how many should I do? Because then I have to ask the council. I just happen to have Carolyn next to me, so I keep pointing to her for the funds to do that. So that kind of, if you could boil down numbers like that, that would really help us to plan. And as Chief was saying, short term is better because that our budget cycles, our capital facilities, that's all goes into that metric.
Yes, and I totally agree that short-term goals are what are really going to help us get us to our long-term goals. Also, we're in a major budget crunch right now, and all of these things cost money. So balancing that with how we're going to afford it and what are the lowest hanging fruit that are going to be most effective, which I'm sure is such an obvious question, but yeah, that's why we're asking.
That's great. So definitely hearing the value of short-term goals and targets. So, and doing what we can in this process. I also think you'll notice one of the goals that we've had is for the city to follow up with a climate action plan, and the timing of that is flexible. So that could also be a way that which you could set some initial targets and then refine them. And one of the strategies we've been talking about with staff is that maybe you do some of the really key data gathering points, such as the EV transition plan, to really identify what it would take to kind of implement that, both for city fleet, but also maybe to support charging infrastructure, and some of those other kind of foundational pieces that can give you data, and then to do the climate action plan as a middle step after that to refine those goals. But I think we can certainly set some initial goals out of this process that can then get refined and more specific for that. Beth, any thoughts to add to that piece?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we can do things like say, if, half of the buildings in town converted by, in the next 3 years, or in the next 10 years, or in the next 20 years, we can definitely put some timelines and percentages on it and see where that gets us. Or, if the whole city fleet converted by X date, stuff like that. When it comes to, so yeah, so then it would be sort of a bulk community measure, and not necessarily like you need to switch over X% of your fleet. But we can definitely put that kind of time scale and like sort of level of effort, if that makes sense, on it.
Perfect.
There we go. Just a question on how the comprehensive plan, we got a lot of policies in here, and I noticed some of them are consider or take into account, and some of them are implement, like a climate action plan. What, from the city assembly and the city's requirement to do these, if they get adopted as a policy in our growth management plan, is the city required? Can I come to the city council and say, hey, it says right here, we adopted this plan. You are to create a climate action plan and put all this. I mean, my understanding is this climate element, well, we got a grant for $500,000. So some of these plans get kind of expensive, and we do have budget issues, and ultimately it's the city's going to pay for all this. So I'm just curious how what we adopt finally gets adopted into the comprehensive growth plan for the next 10 years. What authority is that over what you have to do?
So my understanding is it's our visionary document of our goals and sort of a roadmap to get there. But there are a lot of things in our 2016 comp plan that have not been accomplished. It's very aspirational. It's a guiding document. And then when we add these things into county code, sorry, city code is where we really get moving on them. I mean, in the most broad strokes, right? So.
Okay,
yeah.
that's perfect. I love the aspirational goals. I agree with the chief. Shorter term goals, otherwise nothing ever happens. So putting them, I just didn't want to have something in here. It's like, okay, we really want to do this, or we shall do this, and then be faced with, hey, either you do it because it's in the plan, or we're going to sue the city because you're not doing something that's in this plan.
Right, and we decide what we want to prioritize along the way. Yeah, thanks, Matt.
Yes, and that's kind of folding into the minimum requirements. I can kind of jump there. just to speak what they do have to do, what the climate element does have to achieve. So sorry, Beth, I'm just going to zip here, but it'd be good for keep you in because I think we're still kind of halfway in that conversation. And I'm just going to go to the greenhouse gas emissions one first, and we can come back to resilience. So the minimum requirements of this greenhouse gas reduction sub-element are to result in reductions in overall greenhouse gas emissions generated by transportation and land use specifically. So those are the pieces that are really required within the jurisdiction, but without increasing emissions elsewhere. Result in reductions per capita VMT, so vehicle miles traveled within the jurisdiction, but without increasing greenhouse gas emissions elsewhere in Washington. So you probably saw a lot of that in the transportation element as well.
So just getting back to number one, the requirement to result in reductions. There's no Department of Commerce guidance about how much we have to, or so while we're required to, it also seems a little bit aspirational. We're still going to try to, and we're still going to put goals and policies in place to try to move us in that direction. And that's where, but it's really questionable as to if they're going to hold our feet to the fire. If it's the state going to hold our feet to the fire about actually making any change, seeing any results. I think the important thing is that we're trying. And at this point, they're not trying to put any measures on us, although they're still thinking about how they might be able to. So as long as we're trying, that's the important thing. Now, the VMT point number 2, that might be a little different.
So thanks for jumping in. I think I misunderstood the question. And the other piece, just to tack on to that, which actually comes back to the, that piece of that first slide where we had bullets around focusing on where the city has control. The city has control and leverage over this, but a lot of this is the community's willingness to adopt, right? So you cannot be able to support those kind of transitions in home heating energy without the community purchasing those within their homes. So one of the messages we're really going to bring back for the open house is to say, like, this is the direction we want to head. These are kind of the general kind of goal areas. These are some of the targets we're thinking about, but it really, the ability for Anacortes to achieve that is really on the entire community, certainly not just the city, on businesses, on homeowners, on community members to take on and implement those. So that's an important part of the message. And so you can set goals and the targets, but it really is a community effort to achieve those. And I think that's an important part of this public phase now as well.
A quick question on the vehicle miles traveled. How do you measure that?
I am not a transportation planner. I know John is closer to transportation planning than I am, but it is a modeling. But for this effort, we did rely on and reference the same modeling that was done for the transportation element. But yeah,
They model it. Does that help? And they know it. We hope. One of the things about vehicle mile travel, it's kind of and Beth can crinkle her nose if I say this. There's a lot of emphasis on reducing vehicle miles traveled, but at the same time, a lot of emphasis of converting over to electric vehicles. While driving less is better for a community, but if you're not burning gas, the kind of reduction you're getting then kind of goes away because you're not really reducing greenhouse gas emissions if you're not burning fossil fuels as you're driving more. While there's other benefits to not driving more, there is that kind of conflict between, gee, reduce your vehicle miles traveled, but convert everybody to electric vehicles. So if you convert everybody to electric vehicles, we don't want everybody to go out and drive more because they have electric vehicles, but that reduction gets captured by converting everybody over to electric vehicles, not necessarily in the reduction of vehicle miles traveled, because vehicles miles traveled is saying these people drive this much because they have to go to these places, and they can model that and say, okay, these are the per capita vehicle miles traveled, but you may not actually drive that far. You may walk to work, but you're having to account for the person that has to drive into Mount Vernon for their job. So that's kind of something to think about as you're doing that. But I did want to say something about the goals, and that's exactly what we want to talk about is what are those things you think you can do? One of the things we can come back and say is like, what would that take to do it, right? If you say 100% vehicle conversion to electric for the vehicles in the fleet, we can say this is what it would take to do, but also then Beth can go in and say, this is what you're going to get for that effort. And you can then make the decision based on that level of effort. Like, do you want to do that as a long term or a short term? Like you said, what are the low hanging fruit? That's kind of an analysis of back and forth. What if we do this? What if we do that? And we see that a lot with communities are like, oh, we're going to do this. This is so important. And we come back and say, well, if the city does this, doesn't account for much. But if it's the whole county to do it, then hey, it might actually make a difference. So something to think about as well.
Part of our transportation plan and as part of the work that Parametrics done, we do have an understanding of the vehicle miles traveled currently. So we have a benchmark. So the question is, how are we going to track that? Again, we're just putting measures into place to try to encourage different behaviors, change land use patterns to allow people to work closer to home, those sorts of things.
So that could tie into city planning. If we could get a Costco or a Home Depot, but no, this is what I'm saying. You want to drive via less vehicle miles traveled. Majority of my travel, other than back and forth to work, is to go out to Mount Vernon to Costco and the stores that we don't have. So I imagine if you're just modeling that would be that'd be a big number changer.
So as far
And I don't want that. I'm just
Thank you,
saying
Matt.
that's what-
I'm very relieved to
yeah.
hear that. So yes, what the things that we're doing to make our city even more bikeable, walkable, improving transit. Skagit Transit is working on this excellent long-range plan to improve connections between Mount Vernon and here. So you get on one bus, you don't change at March's Point, you come all the way to downtown Anacortes. Anyway, so all these different initiatives we can do about how we plan and where our density is and where our new dwelling units are created, and being able to walk to the market, walk to the hospital, library, all those things. So that'll all play into it also.
So more tall buildings downtown. To
20,
increase density.
30 stories.
Yeah, no, again,
No,
I've seen the history of, you try to build a good downtown, behind Starbucks, the big 4-story building, and people lost their minds. But if we're going to increase density in the urban area, downtown, we're going to have to do that. And I think there's ways of doing it, but you're going to come up against the NIMBYs, they don't want a building blocking their view of the water. So.
As Katie already pointed out, the climate element reaches into a lot of the other elements, including our economic development element. And right now we're working on an economic development strategic plan. And I just got our draft of it today, was just reviewing a draft of it today. And it talks about what's missing in our community that causes people to have to leave the community. So, while we may not get a big box Home Depot, we might be able to make that up with our hardware stores and our lumber stores and other various stores. So what we're looking at is what's actually missing in the community that is causing people to go out of town. And it's very high level. It's not going to be super detailed, but it gives us an idea of what we want to do in order to reduce vehicle miles. It all plays into reducing vehicle miles traveled, because in Anacortes, people don't want to leave the island. We fully understand that. Like if nobody ever had to leave the island, I think everybody would be perfectly happy. And so that really is, that could be a goal that we put in our economic development element, or in any of our elements, like not have to leave the island for any of our goods and services that we need. Now that's not entirely possible for in any city, but we can do our best to get as close as possible. Also in that, we're looking at our strengths that we have, maritime industry, other industries, our access to islands, all of the things that we do have that maybe we're not taking advantage enough of, that we can leverage further to bring more businesses into town. Again, creating an ability for people to stay here, or maybe have more people live here that work here instead of having to leave. Housing is one of the big weaknesses that we have, and we're well aware of that. We've been working on that for a long time. But those are the key points that we're working on in that economic development strategic plan.
Awesome. We have a long list to get through, so I don't want to push us away from a great conversation. But well, yeah,
Before we dive into that kind of stood out to me as well. I was looking at the two different forms, the tracker and the other one. There's like 110 different policy recommendations.
yeah, there are lots of individual policies.
Is the idea to adopt most of those? Because that's a lot of.
So that's part of tonight's discussion. So some of these, and particularly in and I didn't call out the sectors because it was just trying to simplify, but once we get into so as this idea of the climate element touching a lot of other elements, for this meeting, we wanted to have one big list so we all kind of understand these are like what we're trying to do, what the climate element is trying to do. I think there is opportunity to simplify and refine, and I think particularly around ecosystems, because there's a lot of overlap with the content that you already have in the conservation environment chapter or element, that some of these goals and policies in that section could actually shift there, and the climate element could stay higher level and just say you want to consider climate when you're protecting natural systems, and then reference out. And there's some requirements for the land use element to require planning for wildfire. So some of those policies may move to the land use element in order to be to meet the GMA requirement, or the HB 1181 requirements there. So it's not that they're going, we're here tonight to talk about refinements and things that should come out, or be added. So that's what tonight's discussion is. We're still in that malleable list, and we'll still be in that place when we get to planning commission of additions or things that need to be discussed. So we're still very dynamic in terms of the list, but I want to just folks to be aware that it may be that this list is smaller in the climate element, but we do more cross-referencing out to the other elements to say that these are pieces that kind of support both elements and they're important. All right, Beth, you are welcome to stay, but I know you have a busy household, so if you need to drop off, that's fine. And thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. I'll see you later.
So before we jump in, so we went through the minimum requirements for the greenhouse gas element, and I don't think we mentioned the last one, but it was like around that environmental justice, so making sure that you're prioritizing reductions for overburdened communities. There are also minimum requirements for the resilient sub-element, addressing all the hazards and climate impacts that are identified in the city by the community, and that's what the climate vulnerability work really dug into to figure out what are the local impacts and what do we need to be considering there. And then identifying how you're going to protect and enhance natural areas to foster that climate resilience. So when I was saying some of these policies might shift out into the other elements, it's not that they're not important, and it's not that they're still climate policies, but they're just kind of in the other elements, so that we're doing that work to integrate the effort. So they're still climate policies, even if they're in another element. Yeah.
Will they be coded so you can tell they're also considered in the climate element?
Yes, and
Okay.
we haven't quite worked it out, that strategy exactly, but my vision is that there would be you'd have the policy and then you would say, see this policy kind of as a cross-reference in it. Some communities are just creating headings within their elements to say these are our climate policies within our land use. So that's a strategy you could do. But I think the simplest way, given how we have multiple elements coming together and a busy staff, would be that kind of cross-referencing. But this is a new process, so we'll see coming out of this as more elements come in, different approaches. And so there's no one way. Commerce was, the guidance said you could either have a standalone element or you could really have a fully integrated. So some communities don't have a climate element specifically, they just have climate sections within each of their elements, or may have that. So they're still coming out, so we haven't seen a lot of actually specific examples since the HB 1181 requirements have come out. So what we are doing is still having a standalone element, but really doing that robust cross-referencing so that it's not siloed. So identifying, protect natural areas, and then the last one was identify and protect and enhance community resilience to climate impacts, including social, economic, and that environmental justice component. So those are kind of just the minimum things that the climate element has to do. There's a lot of other in the guidance of things that they're suggesting, and we've been following that as well. But it's always helpful to just be reminded of the minimum requirements. So we're mostly going to be paper-based because you have all this in front of you in your paper. I'll keep it going on the screen. But we just kind of wanted to walk through the goals. And I can walk through every policy, but what I was thinking, we would kind of stick with the goals and then maybe highlight some of the key areas or just see if folks had questions. It's a lot of text to get through. Does it seem to work if I just start with the goal and then kind of see? I'm seeing head shakes. Okay. So the first goal, we just wanted to start with sort of climate change leadership. And this was actually inspired by an existing policy that you had about that Anacortes should be a leader that was coming out of the 2016 climate or comprehensive plan, and also some of the work that had been done prior to that, such as the early inventory. But we have adjusted the language a little bit to really focus on the need. So build city and community capacity to become a regional leader in mitigating and adapting to climate change. And some of what we heard was that there's a real desire for the city to really lead in this area. And there was a lot of wonderful policies that you had in the 2016 comprehensive plan, but then also some capacity challenges around being able to actually implement that. So how we've updated this is to identify what are the things that we would want to do or need to do to sort of build that. So develop and maintain local government staff members' expertise and skills, just to kind of build that capacity. Are there any questions or any specific policies we wanted to talk about here?
So you're right, there's a lot of text here, and I'm wondering, I don't think this is the time to like nitpick it per se. But I feel like some of these could be condensed and combined
Mhm.
because there's some repetitive language. So for example, C13, all the different organizations we're going to coordinate with, C1.3, and then C1.7 is coordinate with PSC and other region. Like we already said that, right? So I'm just
Mhm.
thinking that this could be really, that's just what jumps out at me. But we can really cut these down and eliminate some of the repetitive language, and maybe we have 4 or 5 things within this section instead of 7.
And if I understand, just going through the background of all this stuff, a lot of these are primarily Department of Commerce has a big book of policy recommendations. Those get kind of handed down and you take what works for your individual community. But is there any point, I mean, I know we're just an advisory climate group, but is there going to be Anacortes specific policy recommendations that
Yeah.
throw in, and when does that
Sorry.
come into play?
We've done a little bit of that already, and definitely here to talk about what more can be done. But in this tracker document that also went out, this is the PDF. So this the policy source kind of identifies whether that was an existing policy in the comprehensive plan. If it says CID, that means it's a commerce, and then the ID as to which commerce measure it was. And then this column here, I'm just going to here is the original language of that. So it's either the original language of the policy or the original language of the commerce measure. And then the language on the right, which had all the track changes, that was how we updated it to what we thought might be more applicable to Anacortes. And then we did a first pass on that, worked on that with John and Libby, and then took it to a broader group of staff to also kind of get their way in. So we've done a little bit of that, but I think definitely there's more room to refine, and welcomed, really that's a real key part of the asset of this group, is to point us in where we need to, where we have more work to do.
Yeah.
If this group wants to create its own policies, go for it.
And again, just guidance. This when I greenhouse reductions, and of course I drive by Mount Airy School every day and I see cars lined up all the way back, and yet we have a great bus system. But even myself, when my kids were younger, my wife was driving my kids to Island View from Parkside for some reason, whether it was standing out on the cold corner and stuff like that. So is that the kind of, like, encourage slash require without, you know, if you don't have an excuse, put your kids on the public bus that's made available to you. Kind of drive that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that one hasn't come up, but I think that's a great, something that definitely could be there, or promote. I think there are others the ways that you can be promote or raise the profile of existing services to take it so that they are utilized.
Yeah, it just feels like
Yeah.
this at the end of the day, this is Anacortes. This is our city. This is our plan. We have our own sets of issues and particular problems to the island, or maybe not problems, but issues. And when you look at greenhouse reductions, okay, there's some things we could do that make sense specifically for our little island town that may not be brought in from commerce.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
that is the purpose of having local people, is so you can make recommendations. These are, you know, not local specific, so please do. And as far as the school district one, I suspect the school district would support that. I suspect the city would, because, you know, we have to serve police and accidents that may happen by lineups in the road. And so, yeah, that would be a great one.
Yeah, and I fully appreciate the city council's job that, you know, that's why I was asking aspirational versus must, you know, you should reduce this.
Yeah.
I like this plan for, hey, city council, here's something you should focus on. If you can get around to it, if it doesn't cost a ton of money to do, great. If it doesn't fit into what you're doing, okay.
Great.
So along the lines of like slimming down the number of policies and being relevant to Anacortes, I think 1.6 is something that Commerce can provide to periodically update the analytical tools. That just seems like, you know, who's going to do that? I don't see the planning department having to do that additional job. So just a thought.
I think there will be requirements. So now that there is a climate element requirement, pieces like the greenhouse gas inventory, not that you have to redo it, but you will have to update it with every element. So I think this was just I think we can also, there are pieces that maybe could just be part of the climate element text. Maybe they don't need to be a policy, but we just wanted to, as we're putting this together, you know, suggest it as a policy if there's feelings that doesn't need to be there.
Then it needs to say that,
Okay.
because this doesn't say that.
So I wonder if there's a place like the first section would be kind of more overarching general goals instead of breaking it right down into climate change, leadership, resilient cultural resources, et cetera. Like almost like there's a lot of collaborating, working with partnerships. I almost feel like that's almost in a lot of these sections. And also, for example, consider impacts to blah, 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 consider climate change on this. Like, I feel like we're calling that out in so many different places that it almost could be in one place. Like there's the general beginning overview. And then when we get into these more detailed things like resilient economy, maybe there are fewer things there that are more specific to that, like, you know, engage with local businesses. I feel like we're saying that in a lot of different places. And I really appreciate how thorough this is.
Yeah.
I'm not trying
Oh,
to
no.
throw shade or anything, but some of those like coordination policies, I think could maybe be best captured in, you know, maybe one block in a more general way. And that will sort of like apply to everything that follows, if that makes sense.
If I might add, as we're delving into how to structure and wordsmith and consolidate and simplify, let's not lose sight that in our guiding principles, we have to consider economic sustainability. I think it's indirectly been alluded to already. And also feasibility is supposed to be considered, and we're supposed to be able to prioritize. And right now we've got 100, I think I counted 117. And if we do all of those, we'll have 200 people on city staff and our taxpayers will be broke. So somewhere we have to, in addition to cleaning up the documentation, not forget those guiding principles.
So I had a couple of thoughts.
Yeah.
You mentioned that there is a way to calculate what our emissions from our fleet is and what it would look like to reduce that. I'd be really curious to kind of know what that is in the bigger picture. So we buy fleet stuff all the time. The cost of a sweeper was double for an fully electric sweeper, and they last about 8 years. So like we went with a fuel powered
Right.
sweeper. But we did look at it, we considered it. It was just kind of like, why would we pay twice for something that's sweepers just break down fast. So
Mhm.
they just kind of they're very expensive vehicles, but they fall apart pretty quickly. So knowing that region, kind of knowing what that emissions would achieve with the city alone. But I think you mentioned it, that having a community-based goal seems to be a better fit, I would say, because nothing here is that big. So as an island, if we're moving somewhere together, I think that'd be a lot better than the city kind of running out ahead to do something that really just doesn't accomplish it's a huge investment. It doesn't make a huge dent.
Mhm.
The other thing I just kind of off of that policy, it seemed to me to point out that Skagit County isn't like other counties that are driving the policy in this state. And so I would caution that if we wanted to kind of lean towards what Commerce puts out there, I would kind of advocate against that and kind of more think along the lines of the Skagit County, maybe Skagit Island and San Juan County type of scale. But it's just different out here than I grew up on the Snohomish King County line. And like, yeah, these things that you can put big dents in emissions with that kind of a population and that kind of a fleet. But here it's kind of like just a teeny drop in the bucket. Not that, yeah, we could say that and 1,000 cuts will kill the thing, but like I guess my point being, I would rather see us move as a community instead of seeing the city run out there and do a huge investment in, I'd say with that sweeper example, questionable technology at this point that's not quite there. In 8 years, we've kind of revisited it and maybe it is a better technology or at least a comparable cost situation. So I just wanted to throw those couple things out there because that policy just kind of made me start thinking about like, I don't think we're like the rest of the state, especially the part of the state that drives policy. And I don't see the city making requirements for the city to do that would make a dent in anything unless we had the whole community kind of move with us.
Mhm. Great thought. And to your point, and we don't have Beth now to clarify. I mean, I definitely think there's ways we can get at numbers to kind of inform the targets about what we can get from individual sectors. Some of that, one of the things we recommend is that EV transition plan for both fleet and just sort of infrastructure writ large. And I think the specifics of that might be where some of that is. So that's where we had that sort of maybe the targets, you sort of identify an initial range that comes out of this process, and then you do some of these priority actions like that plan to really help you refine what your target actually is. So I just want to, we'll do everything we can to kind of get close, but it might be a little bit of this two-stage action to collect a little bit more data to really be able to say exactly what you can actually get done as a city through that planning process. So if that makes sense, but I think we can get headed in the right direction out of this process and then teeing up for those additional steps.
I guess one little factoid, there's only one electric fire truck in the whole state.
Right.
So like, let's see how that goes for them first.
Right, right.
Before we go buying one.
Yeah.
Those are, yeah.
So suffice it to say, a EV transition plan would be more along the lines of a goal that we would be interested in than, saying something like have a fully electric fleet by X year.
Yeah.
Give us things to shoot for in the budget. Give us things to shoot for that match the community and can make an impact. That's going to help us.
Yep. And I think in our first meeting, we kind of had overarching kind of thoughts and goals. And one of them was the cost benefit, the economic impact of everything that we kind of throw out there. We just got to be cognizant of the ultimate cost if it's replacing with electric vehicles and they cost double or, that needs to be taken into account because ultimately it's the city paying for these city improvements.
Yeah. Marcus, I think is still there taking notes. So yeah. Any other policies sorry.
And along the lines, a lot of policies can just be planned for, develop a feasibility study. Those can be policies under all these goals. It gives you an interim. You can do it in 5 to 10 years. So think about those as your policies when you have lots of questions in your heads of whether or not it's feasible. And Commerce will pay for those plans.
One thing too that's not as it's a little easier to see in the tracker and out of the commerce guidance is coming back to those sectors when we were introducing some of the measures and went through transportation and buildings and energy and economic development, all the sectors that we were looking at. Commerce guidance does want to see measures that address each of those sectors. So that's a little bit where this kind of so many policies comes from, is that we're wanting to make sure that we're meeting all the various sectors through that. And that's kind of how this list is somewhat structured, is to kind of walk through that strategy. But definitely think there's ways as we refine to sort of build those in. Goals can meet multiple sectors in one. So I think the consolidation piece still works. But wanted to note that there are those we want to make sure we're meeting those pieces. Any other policies we want to talk through? I think there was another page to this. Nope, the next one is. Any other policies we should touch base on out of this section before we move on to the next goal? This really was trying to just set the city up for, having the capacity both in the community and in staff to be able to kind of take those on. So now promote climate awareness and well-being. And these underlined portions are still kind of coming together, but I saw that in your current comprehensive plan, so wanted to try to have these kind of short descriptions ahead of the longer goal. But very open to wordsmithing. Raise awareness about climate change and protect community health and well-being from the impacts of climate exacerbated hazards, including focus on overburdened communities, and ensure that the most vulnerable residents do not bear disproportionate health impacts. So an important goal for kind of meeting as an umbrella goal, since there isn't really a health element currently in your comprehensive plan, for really overtly meeting that goal on climate or environmental justice. So we have a range of policies here, but just curious if anyone sort of stepping back, thoughts or questions around this grouping.
And Katie, can you go to the next slide on the?
Oh, yeah. Let's scroll down one. Back a couple. There you go. And that one was split across 2 pages because it is a lot of them. So one more slide, I think, is the beginning of them. There we go.
What's a wildfire smoke resilience strategy? I'm not familiar with that. I know that wildfire smoke's high probability and it's kind of it's high risk. But what's a strategy to be resilient to smoke?
I will give a start, but I'm always mindful of being in the room with a fire chief as well. So I think the idea is a resilience plan that really just identifies where people can go as a strategy. Is there communications around it's a high smoke day? Are there legal requirements for businesses? So there are lots of pieces that kind of play into when you have outdoor air quality in ways that might be harmful to health. And there's different, some of those are just some examples of what communities are doing of getting notifications out so people are aware. It's not always really clear that the air quality, I think we're getting better as a region in recognizing it, but making sure folks are aware, knowing when schools should be indoors, those kind of guidance. I know that's coming from larger districts, but having a really clear guidance as to, so that's my understanding, but am I hitting on their plates?
I mean, so the state of Washington has a pretty robust set of rules for workers when the wildfire smoke and the particulate levels are up too high. And that could pretty easily be translated into, non-workers. So I'll say civilians, but people at home can get the same message. And usually it comes down to, don't do anything outside that's not essential. And we just pass those messages on to, and obviously, and again, it covers it in here, but, working with and I think they're already kind of there, but nursing homes and things like that with, better HVAC systems, better filters, things like that. So.
Could we somehow combine like 1, 2, and 3? They're all to do with coordinating and being resilient, raising awareness in the community. Maybe that could be wordsmithed down.
Yeah, I think that's an opportunity. I think one value of one being separate is that it aligns also, so when there are strategies for um, that can provide both HVAC updates, the filtering not as less so, but there are strategies that also can align, like a heat pump system that provide air conditioning that would allow kind of a safe space for cooling in the summer, can provide multiple functions. So it helps the city meet greenhouse gas reduction targets, but it also can help with wildfire. So kind of having it as standalone, and it's not well, that specific point though is not well conveyed in that bullet. So that might be something we can look at, but that would be one argument for not combining, just because it can kind of help support that, or maybe it would combine with that other one.
Sure, yeah.
But yes, I think,
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me. And then kind of like 4 and 5, well, because then 6 talks about partner with local regional agencies for efficient cooling and air filtration.
Mhm.
I don't know, there's just some, I think that some of this, like, I mean, I love the community building activities and engage with local community service organizations and engage senior populations. I just feel like there's a way to kind of condense some of those together. I think that would be great.
Perfect.
And even with 2.7, create and implement culturally contextualized outreach and education, and then like blah, 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 blah. Like, I feel like that somehow maybe that could be winnowed down to like 2 things maybe instead of like 5.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, I have a comment and a question. The comment is that I love that so many of these do include vulnerable populations, at-risk populations, senior populations, and so on, and that it includes the impact on the food distribution networks too, which I know we talked about last time, which is so important. My question is actually on 2.9, where it talks about engaging the senior population and raising awareness about how they can help reduce emissions. So my question is the senior population, are they a high producer of emissions? And so, because that surprised me. Definitely preparing for climate impacts makes sense to me, but I was surprised by the helping them.
Yeah, this
reduce
one was a
emissions.
staff suggestion, is just the seeing that's making sure the senior population is engaged in understanding, educating, knowing so I think there was just kind of this idea of there may be some need to do a little more education and outreach of the population, but not coming from a place where they're a bigger, but knowing they're vulnerable, it can be a vulnerable population.
Well, it could be that I know, I mean, firewood provision and having wood fires might
Right.
be potentially part of that, because I know we do a lot of firewood provision to
Yeah.
seniors who don't have other forms of heat. And I know that's a big form of emission. So I didn't know if that was involved in it, but yeah.
Okay. I'm going to keep us moving just because we have a lot, but this is all great, wonderful feedback. So just slow me down if we start to move too fast. Resilient cultural resources, ensure that cultural resources and practices, including significant historic sites and culturally important traditional foods and natural resources, are resilient to the impacts of extreme weather and other natural hazards worsened by climate change. So just a few policies here, but this, oh yeah, sorry. So many buttons. This, though important of the tribes are included as in kind of a group measure in the beginning, but this is one where really calls out the goal of, really engaging with and continuing to engage with tribal partners. It's the key focus of this area.
I guess I'm going to keep saying this for a while, but I think this could be sort of edited down a little bit too, while still including all the relevant points about ecosystems, relationships, and historic and culturally relevant sites, like how important all of those things are. Maybe it's 2 bullet points, and maybe it's just maybe not as much description, because I think I don't know if we need that many words.
Sure. This is also something that, if we include it, that's, if we're pulling it in and are able to make it as succinct, could move back into that climate leadership piece and just be a policy with some sub bullets, and that could also be, so things don't need to stay a goal. We kind of suggested it just as a way of grouping things, but if we feel like it's really needs to be condensed, there's also that option of let's make it a policy and figure out a place where it still really fits and robust. But there is that power in having a goal for an issue. So there may be two sides to that.
But I do like calling it out because I think it's really important and it hasn't always been in the past. So I would advocate for keeping it its own thing.
Is it okay? I mean, we were also mindful of looking at your existing comprehensive plan where you have kind of goals and then like a number of policies, and that number ranges. Some of them are quite long depending on the element and some of them are shorter, but they all had, at least a handful. Would it be okay to have one, goal with only one or two policies? Does that feel, yeah, you're okay.
I really like the C3. I mean, it seems, there are some things that could be condensed, but it's a nice concise area that I'm looking at stealing and putting in some of my plans because it's nicely done.
Which one? Well, the whole section.
I mean, just pieces of it are relevant throughout all the planning that we do in parks. So I think it's nicely done. It could be condensed like all of them could, but I think it's nicely done and important.
I think a lot of the language is from commerce, so I'm going to pass the Okay, well, hearing good support for that one. So let's go into ecosystems, because this is a big area where we had kind of sub goals, and I would love ideas about reducing just the kind of real estate that this is taking up. So the overall goal is supporting ecosystem adaptation, protecting existing ecosystems and support adaptation as they are impacted by climate change. And we borrowed a strategy that they've done in the transportation element where they had a lot of goals, kind of clustering them under a category. In that case, it's a heading. We're calling them sub-goals. But that was a way of kind of grouping these pieces together under a goal. So we didn't end up with a zillion goals. We trying to be mindful of most of your elements have 10 to 14 goals. And so that was we were trying to match that with the climate element. But this is also an area where we are likely to shift a lot of this content over to the conservation and environment element, and could be very much more efficient in the climate element into how it's represented. But I think all of the policies, even if they get combined, the points were things that staff thought were important. So curious from this group to feel if there's pieces within that were particularly standing out or you had questions on. And it starts first with coastal ecosystems and then urban forests and then riparian and then urban forest.
On 4.1.5, it talks about floodplain management planning, and I'm not as familiar with that here on Fidalgo Island as watershed plan management.
This has come up, yeah.
So, in Anacortes, we have very minimal floodplain areas. We don't have any creeks that flood. We have some shorelines in the skyline area is in the floodplain. Ship Harbor would be in the floodplain. And then everything along Fidalgo Bay, and maybe a little bit down at the far south end. And I'm not sure if the Samish area with the RV park, I'm not sure if that's in the floodplain or not, but those would be the limited areas that might be in a coastal flooding zone. And the city does have rules for flood protection, and we've actually adopted a requirement to build 1 foot higher than the base flood elevation, and that's above and beyond what most communities do.
Do you think 4.1.5 and 4.1.6 could, if the goal is to consolidate more, could easily be consolidated and, words taken out so that they're both doing really similar things? It's just sort of consider sea level rise and then monitor what existing regulations you have and update accordingly.
I haven't had a chance to read that. I totally agree. I agree with you though. I think of a river floodplain when I hear floodplain, but is there going to be a set of policies around like protecting life and property from climate resiliency? This one just made me think of it from a erosion and sea level rise standpoint, that if the city became aware, like, well, okay, this hillside is being eroded out, that there's some mechanism in place that we notify the people that live at the top of that hill, so they can start making educated decisions about what's their next move type of thing.
We don't have that language currently, but it's certainly something that could be added or integrated into the goals here.
Because it's probably not, this isn't the right spot, because this is like protecting habitat and stuff with sea level rise and erosion, but there's also
Yeah.
life and property that just came to mind.
Absolutely. And you do have a hazard, the kind of hazard, natural hazard section in the conservation environment. So that might be one where it's, that's related to that as well. And so there could be goals and policies in there that are similar, and we could just say as well as climate change. So that might be an area where it's a cross-reference out to similar policy you already have, but also just making sure climate's considered in that.
It might actually be better in the land use. So I don't know if Marcus, if you're listening, but if we're gonna
Listening.
if we're gonna have any resiliency goals for protecting property and built environment, that probably be in the land use element.
Good note.
Sorry, Marcus, go ahead.
No, I was just saying good note. Yep.
One thing I wanted to point out here, because this is another one of these kind of near-term actions. So we've done some initial vulnerability work, obviously, with this study, but we are recommending as a near-term action to conduct a full sea level rise vulnerability assessment based on some emerging data that's coming out, and also kind of in preparation for the next shoreline master plan update. Commerce is in the process of updating their guidance, which they say will be released 2026-ish. So I know you're working to update your SMP now, but there's going to be another update to meet those requirements kind of in the next cycle. So that's what those two policies were. Yeah.
So where in this, like I see the update city shoreline master program, is that on a regular schedule? I mean, is that something that's going to be reopened? Because it doesn't seem like it says reopen it soon. And then you just mentioned there's near-term goals, and where in here does it give any indication that, hey, if we adopt this, we're expecting action soon, versus I see that, I'm like, okay, does that mean just next time we update the master program according to the schedule, we'll take into account shoreline?
I think that's the intent, but again, ecology is going to be releasing guidance, and so this is more John's area of expertise. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Which does not need to be a policy or a goal. Like, I'd actually encourage removing language that says follow state law.
Okay.
Especially since we're trying to whittle down from 117.
So we can remove those as policies. I think we were trying to highlight that it's a action though. So maybe we can shift that climate vulnerability study to like an action list that's in the climate element text, just to say like, we've done some work here, but there's more work and there's going to be some new data coming out to kind of really fully assess sea level rise in the city and bring together kind of some disparate elements and consider bluff erosion as part of that. So that's what we're kind of getting at, is trying to do that. But maybe it doesn't need to be a policy. We can just have it as a
state law says to do it. We're gonna do it. Well, I mean, 111 is about sea level rise. We'll have to do that because the guidance is we'll make it a speed limit right now. Is it going to point directly to do this for sea level rise? You're going to have to figure that out yourself. I've just been to a couple of workshops where I work on that. I think it's the very thing, but it's going to be guidance that you can apply to your update. So.
Actually, and I'm looking at C 4.1.3. That's kind of incorrect, because coastal flooding is going to be under our shoreline critical areas regulations. So we should get rid of that one.
I wanted to mention that 4.1 417 and 424 on the next page, to me, they say the same thing. It's about access and climate adaptation plans and implementing strategies.
4.1.6 and sorry, what,
So what, 417
yep.
and 424?
Oh, 424.
Yeah.
Yes, they do say the same thing. It is, so this is where we're under this sub-goal. I think this is where an organization kind of audit, but it's we're covering coastal systems first and then riparian systems and then urban tree canopy. So we're kind of going by ecosystem.
It's also called out in 4.3.5. So maybe that if we do have a general section that's a kind of an overarching, maybe that could just be part of that.
Yeah.
Applying to everything.
We can go to the next sub-goal, kind of restore, protect and restore streams, riparian zone, estuaries, wetlands, floodplains. So some similar pieces, not the specifics of the coastal, but some similar pieces. And the real idea here is just sort of to consider climate impacts in these.
And 1, 2, and 3 be condensed into one?
Yeah. I think so. We might use bullets to kind of call out the key pieces. And the other piece is with the conservation environment chapter, some of those might align. So it might be that that actually goes away, but we just make sure the climate is considered in that conservation environment chapter. So this is where we're trying to identify what we're trying to do for climate, and then we're going to figure out how it fits in, and we're sort of partway done with that. So I want to go to urban tree canopy, just because this was another area that kind of overlaps with some other companion goals, and the one big one. And so this is maybe another area. This doesn't need to be a policy, but I'd love to get your thoughts, because this is another more of a strategic action of doing this, adopting and maintaining an urban forest master plan. There's a requirement in the for HB 1181 to evaluate tree canopy as part of the comprehensive plan, but this would be a more robust assessment work to manage the urban forest overall, not necessarily parks trees. It would really bring all those pieces together. So street trees would be included in that type of approach. And this was from Commerce originally, but also from some WDFW guidance that we've kind of merged together. So they recommended it as a policy. So that's the argument for keeping it. But it also is an action. So we could maybe tighten up the language and keep the action parts, the actual planning parts, as a kind of a strategic actions in the climate element itself, and then be more concise with the policy language.
John, can you remind us what your plan looks like?
Community forest lands plan?
That's similar to what this is asking.
Nope. So the community forest lands plan is just the jurisdiction of the forest lands. This would be, sounds like you want an urban tree canopy master plan, which is outside of parks. It includes a lot of parks, a lot of green space, school property, port property, but a lot of private property, mostly private property.
Private property, street trees, that would bring all the pieces together. And what it would allow you to do is to be able to kind of assess where you're at. We have done we can bring a little of that to the comprehensive plan, but right now I don't have the graphics in front of me. The trees are all mostly in the Anacortes Community Forest, and then you have kind of, you have some street trees in downtown, but it's a much less. And so,
because people want to see the water.
Right, yeah, no.
Pissed off when we plant trees.
Yeah, always some challenges. But having a plan basically allows you to kind of manage it as an overall coverage, and with benefits for reducing temperatures, heat island effect, all those pieces, as well as reducing greenhouse gas. So we know you're getting some great benefits from Anacortes Community Forest, but you can get data and grow the urban canopy overall. So
I think it's extremely important to keep it in like this.
the element that's been missing in Anacortes on this aspect is a nonprofit to plant the trees and work with the city. Because that, to coordinate with the utilities, coordinate with the underground utilities, and coordinate with the homeowners. City doesn't have the horsepower. So that's an element that's been missing from this for years.
Okay.
I mean, other cities have it, neighborhoods,
Right.
Friends of Trees, whatever
Yep,
it
yep.
is.
The one thing I want to point out about 4.3.1, well, it sounds important, and I think this might actually be a required canopy cover analysis that we need to do anyway. This is something that will actually cost money and probably a lot of money, whereas many of these things are more, at best, we might make changes to our critical areas regulations or our city regulations. This is actually going to need to require us to put some money up. So I think we probably still have some climate grant money left over. We should probably make sure that this one is earmarked for money.
There are some great tools that we've been looking at for, yes, there is a requirement for the climate element. It's not, I don't think, this full assessment, but there are some great tools available from the U.S. Forest Service and USDA that help with these kind of tools, and they're free online pieces. And there's many types of tools. So there's, it is likely to have a little bit of funding needed for it, but I think there's also some helpful tools out there to support.
So
Okay.
the city does, it is required by its municipal stormwater permit to have a tree canopy analysis as well. So I'll match your money with stormwater money. And we do need to do it soon. There is a deadline for it. I can try to get that for you, but I don't have it on the top of my head.
For a requirement, is it part of the inventory for the capital facilities, or is it separate from?
No, it's a citywide.
Oh, okay. Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
So, but not as part of, not for the comp plan cycle within, but it's coming up soon in the near term.
Yeah, separate regulatory
Got it.
trigger,
Okay.
but it'll be citywide and it'll include the parks, it'll include everything, all tree canopy.
Okay.
So this gets back to a question, maybe this is, I don't know if it's worth it, but Carolyn, as a council member, as you're adopting this or in the planning department adopting this, is there anywhere that's going to have a little asterisk at the end, kind of like legislation as a fiscal note? Says, if you pass this, there's a cost associated with it. Is there anywhere on there for these different elements? If you're saying, if we pass this, I need some of that climate money. It
Be nice.
Yeah, is there anything just to inform as the different departments and the public looks at this saying, okay, here's all the recommendations. These
Yeah.
ones are going to cost money and here's just a rough estimate.
Yeah, no, we don't, I haven't seen that in the comp plan. Some communities are, and we are starting to put together boards for the climate element. We aren't doing it quite at the policy level, so not the right thing, but one of the things we're looking at is what is kind of ease of implementation. So it's like considering both costs, but also just like how easy is this to do, as we're kind of sharing. We're kind of doing it at the goal level, so not maybe at this exact policy level, so it might not exactly be what we're doing, but we are trying to bring some of that, like, this is going to be harder to do. This is pretty easy. So we're bringing a little bit of lens of that to the open house, but it's something we could do a little more of as we're refining.
Yeah, just we're a small city with a small city budget and
Yeah.
yeah, lots of benefits. And that's what, I mean, it's transparency. It's,
Yeah.
this is things are going to cost, but here's what you're going to get out of it. Here's, so.
This is another one that kind of works across. So it's a resilience effort, but it also helps with greenhouse gas because it helps draw down your emissions. So it has multiple benefits. And that is something we're going to be highlighting as we refine this list as to what the multiple benefits are. But yeah, I hear you that it's an uncertain moment about where funding is coming from, loud and clear. And so we're trying to be mindful of that as we're putting this together. Okay, I'm going to move on to, now we're switching over to, so that kind of was the ecosystem section. Now it's talking about energy resilience. Coordinate with region utilities and jurisdictions to increase resilience of energy infrastructure, including generation, transmission, and storage, so that it is able to accommodate renewable energy opportunities, meet increased demand, and withstand and recover quickly from the impacts of extreme weather. and natural hazards worsened by climate change. So this is your infrastructure, your energy infrastructure goal, really supporting that. And then a bunch of policies. PSE sent a bunch of, or sent over recommended policies. And so a lot of these kind of are coming from those. We made some light edits to those, but open to your suggestions or refinements here.
I did note that PSC had fingerprints on this. It's important that we participate with PSC, but the word for some reason coordinate keeps popping up, and it sounds like we're going to drive the bus when it comes to power generation and power distribution. We're not in that business, they are. I'd rather see the adjective cooperate or participate with than suggest that we might be the drivers of the bus.
Yeah, they use the word partner, so I was trying to get a little pulled back from to go to coordinate, but you cooperate, I think, is.
I think, yes, this could definitely be edited quite a lot. And I would like to call out the city's own utility discount program for lower income residents. But maintaining the city's utility discount program. It's not just for like, although no, we don't have it with PSE. Sorry. We have it for other utilities though. So that should be in here somewhere. Right. So maybe this isn't the spot. Sorry, I'm kind of getting gridded out.
Okay, well, we welcome edits on PC's language. I know wanting to just be mindful that they're providing those and then however the city wants to integrate those. But they had identified a number of separate policies. So that's kind of how we brought those in. Okay, so now we get down. So that was the first one was infrastructure. Now we're talking about more buildings, energy efficient buildings to reduce emissions and reduce greenhouse gas. Sorry, energy efficient buildings to reduce emissions and then reduce greenhouse gas emissions from buildings, promote renewable energy conservation and efficiency technologies, and support transition of energy systems. Now this is another area that we have kind of the sub goal structure because we wanted to kind of talk about these are kind of how you're going to be addressing reducing emissions from these key sectors. So the first kind of sub goal was reducing emissions from new buildings. And so offering incentives, we don't specify exactly what the incentives is. I think that's something we can talk about tonight. And also in the previous comprehensive plan, they had talked about incentives generally, but not defined those. So helpful, good to discuss tonight kind of what the goal is to how specific to get in this process and then what to leave for development regulation work that follows. But offering incentives for new buildings to include energy efficiency and renewable energy features beyond minimum code requirements. And we added that language. And some of this draws on, you had some initiative, or excuse me, some incentive language in your previous comprehensive plan. So we're sort of updating that. But there's been massive changes or big changes in the state's energy code since. And so what we're trying to do is update to make sure you're not offering incentives for things that they're supposed to do anyway. So we're trying to say where programs are going to go way beyond, and there's some question marks as to those energy codes as well. But that was what the revision of language here was, just to make sure that if you're gonna offer incentives, make sure you're doing it for things that are not required, but you're moving things beyond that. Promoting use of environmentally friendly construction practices in public buildings. So that would be going towards kind of LEED certification. We left it a little bit loose if that's helpful. So we said such as LEED, but if we want to just say, if it's more helpful to just say pursue LEED certification with all public buildings, we can be more specific. You like this one, okay. And then the last one, this one had a lot of discussion so I did flag it with this note, but adjust single family home impact fees and system development charges. So those homes with larger impacts and utilities pay more. A city's already doing some of this. And so, but this was, feedback we got from staff when we discussed that it's an interesting area to pursue. The city already does some of this. It also has complexity to it that needs to be considered. So wanted to throw it out there to see if how folks in this group reacted to that.
How does that work? I saw that and it kind of caught my attention too. And I saw your note on the side with legislation that requires it. So
Yeah.
looked into that, but I'm curious, Carolyn, maybe you know, single family impact fees is that on the way I read it, it's new developments. When a new development comes in, there's fees attached to that. And if they're bigger and take up more space, potentially drive more traffic. That's not on existing homes, or is that what?
No,
we're
it's
pushing?
just on new buildings. So you'll pay a fire impact fee for new buildings. You'll pay transportation based on the type of use. Single families a single rate right now. And we also have a park impact fee, and I think that's it. So, and park impact fee is only for residential
Okay, and then that somehow
Nope.
turns around and reduces if you're buying
and
if you're
commercial.
reduces fees on if you're doing a multifamily or lower.
For transportation, it does. There's a lower rate depending on the size of the building. And those are based on complex calculations put together in our transportation element. But
Okay.
not fire and parks. It's just straight units. And commercial is going to be based on square feet.
And I like the concept. I understand the concept, but we've also in other places talked about reducing the cost of building and homes and impact fees.
I don't think ours go on low income homes. Or fire impact fees, I don't know about 3D build, but ours.
Yeah.
Well, only if they're under a certain threshold, which is something like 50% AMI, and it has to be, sign a rider that says it's going to stay like that.
Like family center, housing authority, yeah.
Yeah.
So this is a policy to, since you already have them and you already adjust them relatively, it's work that the city's going to be doing anyway, but by including it, you're sort of announcing that climate might be a consideration in how you're setting some of those impact fees. So even though that is one of those that the city's going to do this, including it here kind of suggests that there's a climate rationale for this too. Right.
Yeah, so it's Libby saying this is also a connection fee for when you connect a new water, whether it's residential, commercial, or sprinkler or irrigation. And then there's a connection fee for sewer. And then we have stormwater fees too, which is based on square footage, size of lot, impervious service.
So I get charging. I mean, you're building a new development, big houses, you're going to have more utilities, and there's impacts.
Mhm.
But having this in the climate section, is there a tie to the impact fees that you're charging? And if so, are those fees going to go into a climate account to pay for climate stuff? Or just
I think part of the connection to climate is that, and this is a goal that kind of originated from commerce, is that some cities have their own utility, their electric utility, power utilities. And so this would be a way of reducing emissions by increasing impact fees if they're encouraging that. So the city could explore in doing that kind of you don't regulate you're not the utility provider, energy provider, but you could explore using an impact fee to help you meet reduction goals by saying we're going to gather a larger impact fee for homes that are going to be less efficient based on size or based on, so you could set what that parameter would be. But so that's kind of the direction you could head with something like this, but it doesn't define that specifically in this measure. It leaves it
so
loose.
it's to drive behavior.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Discourage heated driveways.
All right. I want to keep us.
Speaking of encourage, I'd like to back up to 6.1.1, which we're at the policy level at this point and suggesting offering incentives and bonuses. I'd rather use the word encourage or promote like we have elsewhere, rather than jumping to implementation by having that specificity.
Okay. So next under the sub goal is reducing emissions from existing buildings. So that was all talking about kind of new buildings. This is now existing buildings. Prioritize the preservation and conversion of the most energy efficient water and space heating and weatherization to the most, excuse me, and weatherization of housing, particularly in overburdened communities to reduce emission and increase resilience. And then this is another area where I think the two top goals policies could be combined because they're quite related. So that was kind of what the goal could be, that this is an important strategy. And this is a really key way that the city could support reduction of local greenhouse gas emissions. So this is a really key policy for helping the city meet targets but to enable this to not be kind of, to make sure that you're not making it an overburdening communities, seeking ways to coordinate with regional or state agencies to identify funding or rebate programs. There are rebates available. There's some efforts underway to kind of expand programs where they go into lower income communities to kind of help lower income communities make these transitions. So we know that undertaking a program for the city to take the lead on that would probably be an overburden. So we sort of suggested there's ways you could tap into efforts that are underway. I think this is a big goal, or this is a big policy that a lot of communities are exploring, and I think there's going to be a lot of entities kind of trying to do some of this, and so could be some partnership coming out of these climate elements to do that. So King County has already started to do this. They have some programs in Bellevue where they go in and sort of help lower income communities transition, do weatherization. So those are kind of a good one to piece, understand the funding question is still there. So we wanted to understand that you can't necessarily take the lead on this, but we think this is something a lot of communities are going to be starting to do coming out of these climate elements.
It seems like it's not worded well for Anacortes in particular as far as overburdened communities. I feel like Anacortes is the community. Are we talking about overburdened households or low-income households?
I think, yeah, that was some of it, is that this can be a barrier for folks. So if you have a requirement or you're really kind of pushing people to do this, that some people are going to be able to and some people are not. So how can you particularly, and this is another where if it's a heat pump strategy that also provides air conditioning, this can also really benefit those communities that might be vulnerable to wildfire smoke or heat impacts. So this is another area where pursuing a program or a rebate strategy on a regional level or with the partners could benefit in multiple ways. So we can try to make that more explicit if that's helpful. Okay.
To see policies that make sense to us in the community when we read them. This sounds like a statewide policy.
Okay. But generally, no, I'm not hearing pushback on the policy itself. It's just the wording. Okay, perfect.
In bigger jurisdictions, they have, separate communities in kind of patchwork throughout the city. And we have identified through the census data that there are certain areas that are higher concentration of kind of different incomes and ethnicity and that type of stuff. But yeah, generally speaking, Fidalgo Island is the community here. So your point's well taken. It's just, we do try to target, like even with going for grants that are state level grants. If we can point like there's more low income people around this project than other parts of the city, we'll take that opportunity. But yeah, generally speaking, this is one community.
It's like a neighborhoods, not a community, right?
Another big one here, retrofit publicly owned buildings for energy efficiency by updating building materials, transitioning heating in public buildings to energy efficient heat pump technologies, lots of other strategies there. We talked about that with staff and there wasn't a lot of concern there, but just wanted to note that.
So like city-owned buildings.
City-owned buildings, yeah. And yeah.
The school district too.
Well, I mean, there's the publicly owned, and there's more than just city-owned public. There's like port-owned, there's school district, there's probably some other, I don't know, flood districts or something, I don't know. But it's a question, so maybe some specificity there would be nice.
Okay. Should it be city and school? I mean, or just city? Okay.
I'm not a planner. It's like clean building standards,
Mhm.
like, rules on size of your building, you have to start doing things.
Mhm.
And I can't remember what all those are, but my employer, the port, has some warehouses.
Mhm.
It's not mission spaces. People
Got it.
they work in them, but they're not like working at a desk kind of thing. So I'm just curious because I was thinking about some of these things in that context. I don't know how they mesh together.
Yeah, no, great point.
Does the port fall under the city? When it comes to the comprehensive plan, when it says retro, if if the plan is to retrofit public buildings, it may be a public building, but you're a different public entity, so this doesn't, fall under this.
I mean, the port still follows city codes and like certain things. I don't know if this would be.
The port, we follow the city's code.
Yeah.
For our buildings and developments, but I don't know how this would intermesh between the things, right?
Yeah. But again, we're a small community. We'll work it out together.
We can work it out.
Yeah.
One, I want to keep us going because I know we're running out of time. I wanted to ask just about, because this didn't come up with staff meeting, is LED fixtures for streetlights and how much is there more work to do there? Or has the city done a lot? Is that worth keeping in as kind of a noting streetlight opportunities as a policy, or have we done that?
No, I think it should stay in.
Okay.
Yeah, we have a lot of older streetlights. A lot of them have been retrofitted though, but
Okay.
I think it's always good to keep that in there until we're done.
Okay, perfect. All right, I'm going to keep us moving. So support energy resilience, support overall energy resilience by promoting local solar energy production as well as other small scale renewable energy. Geothermal was one example, and battery storage. So this is sort of supporting those kind of microgrid is a word that gets used a lot, but just making sure that there's ways to integrate local energy production, but thinking of it as being small scale. So we're not talking about massive energy. Yeah.
Opportunity for consolidation, 7.3. The battery is pretty repetitive to 5.8, couple pages back.
I have a fractured memory of a conversation with PSC about having no regulation over where they put those. Like they didn't want to have local government jurisdiction over where they decide to put battery sites. And so I would encourage that the city of Anacortes put something in there that we do retain our ability to site or zone where those go.
The fire code references in FBA like 55, and it's pretty specific.
I just remember some weird move where PSC was like, we're gonna put them where we feel like it. Thanks for asking.
Okay, I'm going to keep us moving, but slow me down if we want to dig in more. Resilient development. So this is when we start looking at land use kind of pieces. Promote land use patterns, development in buildings that are resilient to climate impacts. And so this is another one divided into sub goals, also an opportunity for consolidation or maybe shifting around. Establish land use patterns that increase the resilience of the built environment, ecosystems, and communities to climate change. So directing new development to areas where exposure to climate hazards is low and where climate mitigation strategies can be effective at reducing risk. So this first one really comes out of the climate vulnerability study. We know that the downtown area was kind of more vulnerable, but we still, as looking at it, part of that second part is there are a lot of mitigation strategies that could reduce some of the risk in that area, reduce a lot of the risk, such as building strategies that reduce the urban heat and impact. So we knew that popped up a little bit in the climate vulnerability, but we still feel it makes sense to kind of continue with those land use patterns. And I felt like it was important for the climate element to kind of be clear about that. So that's why that's there. But I don't know if there was a comment there. It popped up. That's yeah. Right. Well, and it was popping up a little high, but I think that's why the second half of that sentence is saying where kind of mitigation strategies can be effective at reducing the risk. So a lot of what was producing that, the sea level rise is a part of it. And so I think thinking about where there's not super extensive sea level rise impacts, but where there are those will need to be kind of identified and planned for. But the other big one was heat impacts in that area and the potential exposure to urban heat in that area. Lots of impervious surface, not a lot of tree canopy, but there's good ways to mitigate it. So that's why we aren't trying to say that we're trying to build on the existing land use patterns that you have, and it still makes sense to kind of continue to invest and increase density in that area because there are ways to mitigate the risks that are there. Yeah. Yes. Yes, absolutely. And this is an area where we're going to be cross-referencing out. I do think it's valuable, though, for the climate element to kind of support the land use element, to say, like, it's a benefit to your climate goals if you continue to invest in and create density within downtown, because I think that those pieces aren't always clear, or those connections aren't always clear. So that's kind of why we are highlighting it. But this is an area where we're not trying to recreate the land use element. We're just connecting out. Okay. So we'll look at ways to coordinate and refine those. Promoting development that is resilient to impacts of climate change. So this is really talking about kind of development and strategies and considering incentives here for projects to deliver some more specific things. So the first one was really building energy, and this is also considering incentives that can help reduce urban heat island effects, stormwater management, all those pieces. So just that there could be incentives for those as well. And then future updates to design standards to also further mitigate that. So just using the built environment to kind of help do the work for you and support resilience there. I'm going to skip down to the next goal, reduce transportation emissions. So reducing greenhouse gas emissions from transportation by reducing VMT. And then the key pieces of this are supporting transition to electric vehicles and encouraging the use of cleaner fuels in marine transportation. So kind of a big umbrella goal for transportation, and then split into those, like really the more efficient land uses to reduce vehicle miles traveled. Again, these are all supported in your land use element, and we're not trying to reinvent the wheel, but we're just kind of cross-referencing out to sort of say this is helpful for supporting climate.
Katie,
yeah.
Katie, sorry, you blew by 8.2.4.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
I just wanted to, in my view of the world, in prioritizing the economic feasibility, I'm not too excited about prioritizing bailing out property owners and economic priority. That wouldn't be at the top of my list.
Which one?
8.2.4.
Yeah, that was my thought when I read that too.
Of course, it does say if feasible. To me, it's never feasible.
Okay. Yeah.
At the risk of stirring up a debate, by acquiring those lands, you're making the landowner whole and you're reducing insurance risk. And if there is an economic benefit to the city and the community as a whole, it turns out better. I mean, when you think of FEMA buyouts, yes, you're paying somebody to move off of land that they probably should have never lived in, but at the same time, you're ending the process of repeated insurance payout time after time after time. So it is a debatable issue.
I'm fine with FEMA coming in and doing it. I just don't want to do it with my tax dollars early.
It's good.
But reasonable use, so people need to know they can build in those places.
Okay, I'm going to keep us moving because I know we're getting towards time and it's a long day. Okay, so decrease vehicle. So this is the VMT part of it. I think these are relatively straightforward. Implement multimodal transportation planning. Again, we're not trying to recreate the transportation element. We're really just cross-referencing out here. But these are the pieces that really kind of were aligned with and supported in making that connection. And again, meeting that requirement to consider VMT reductions in the climate element. So moving down to 9.3, the sub-goal, support the transition to electric vehicles. So the first part of this is that we talked about already, that EV transition plan to convert public fleet to zero emission vehicles and identify EV charging. I think we've talked about that one. And then encouraging installation of EV charging retrofits. So a lot of sort of individual policies, but they would really start with that plan to identify kind of all, what's most feasible. And then the final goal, 9.4, support the transition of the marine industry to cleaner fuels. This gets back to what Beth was talking about, kind of the harder fuels of the moment with diesel emissions. So these are really high level. This is all about coordination and continuing to work. So not necessarily setting any expectations for these in this climate element, but recognizing this is a source of emissions. The city is going to need to kind of figure out as fuels become available, as new technology becomes available. So not setting specifics here, just supporting that coordination.
What's form-based code?
Oh,
916.
916 form-based codes are just codes that shape kind of the form of development, and it's a more flexible way of promoting density in the built environments, or increasing density, but controlling the form of buildings to kind of deliver that. So, which the city has.
Quick, 924, the city should implement travel demand management programs and strategies for city employees and all that. I don't really know if is that a thing we would do? I don't know what that is.
We talked about it at the last meeting and we suggested it could be, so we kept on the list, but if it feels like it's not going to be something, it really is just programs to help reduce trips, those kind of things. So easy one to take off if it doesn't feel like it's something that's feasible.
I don't know. I don't have that strong of a feeling about it. I just don't recognize what it is. It doesn't really sound like us for some reason, but.
Did
John,
you say travel demand management?
Yeah.
That's Andy's. The city should implement travel demand management programs and strategies for city employees and coordinate with major employers and areas to support similar strategies.
Yeah, it's commuting, like, yeah. 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 Okay. But we can clarify that it's commuting because travel, what gets plan or ease? Trip reduction.
It trips me up because we have travel demand modeling that we use
Yes.
to develop our transportation plan.
Okay, so I'm going to skip down to 10, resilient transportation system. So this is really about resilience. So the piece before was around emissions. This is really making sure local transportation system, including infrastructure, routes, travel modes, is able to withstand and recover quickly from impacts. And this is where we're really kind of highlighting the SR20 vulnerabilities. So this is really key policy to highlight that. But we're also cross-referencing that into the transportation element, and where they've already identified a list of things. So we'll be also kind of including that as a sub-bullet to that list. So that's cross-referenced out. And these are just kind of highlighting the pieces that have been identified as vulnerable recreational trail systems, considering stormwater impacts, because that's a co-benefit for a lot of pieces. So yeah, nothing.
On 10.2, I would say instead of expanding recreational trail systems, I think we should emphasize maintain and improve the recreational trail systems to be resilient instead of focusing on expanding. We need to look at the trail system in light of climate change, more precipitation, shorter duration, trail erosion, things like that. And that's goes back to economic, how much it's costing us.
So I would also advocate, though, that when we increase our recreational trail systems, I mean, we could also, some of them are also multimodal, like commuter options for people to get from one place in town to another. So I would not take out expand. I think maintenance is a really big concern, and we should concentrate on that as well. But to me, if we have trails that are both, and maybe it's not just recreational, but it's multimodal, it's non-motorized transportation opportunities, and that helps reduce vehicle miles traveled and gets us out of our cars.
So I think there was ways to meet both of those feedback in updating the text.
considering those 2 points of view, make sure to go back and look at the state definitions for multimodal. Then there's references to right of way, I believe, and the trails that I was thinking of were the off-road, not in the right of way. So maybe it's a definitional issue. Because Carolyn, you're speaking of transportation routes as opposed to recreational routes, and trail has to be defined.
Well, some are both, right? So the Tommy Thompson Trail is both of those things. It's recreational and it's a commuter. And also the Guimas Channel Trail, ideally at some point is going to be, you know, the continuation of the Tommy Thompson will be connected to state ferries. And that's a way that people can get to and from safely and not necessarily feel like they have to drive because they're afraid, sort of thing. So I think that it can be broadly defined rather than trying to make it narrow.
Okay. Moving on to 11, preparation and emergency response. So enhance emergency preparedness, response, and recovery efforts to mitigate risks and impacts associated with extreme weather and other hazards worsened by climate change. So just a kind of collection of pieces here. The focus on the Senior Activity Center and the Resilience Hub functionism was a staff. I know that there had been investments in effort and improvements made already, so kind of expanding that, and that was a staff suggestion. So that's the Resilience Hub is important, I think, to highlight here. Mapping transportation infrastructure that's vulnerable as those are identified. Any thoughts or concerns or questions with these? Nope. Okay, I'm going to keep moving. So 12, reducing wildfire risks, raise awareness about local wildfire hazards and develop local codes and plans to reduce risks. So this is a whole goal that is very likely to just move to the land use element in order to meet that requirement, but we're going to need to figure out how it's a key part of climate too. So we kind of need to figure out what that connection is. So not trying to duplicate content across the comprehensive plan, but just for those who know, when you see the next draft of this might not be in that list, but it is still in the comprehensive plan. It just is a requirement for land use to plan for wildfire. Any questions or thoughts on these? And we went through it at the staff meeting too, so. Resilient economy, so ensure the local economy is resilient to climate disruptions and fosters business opportunities associated with climate mitigation and adaptation. I haven't seen the economic development piece, so maybe there's some things that are coming out of that could be added here. But this felt like this was actually, some of these were coming out of the recent marine conversation, both the first one and also the most recent one about kind of valuing and highlighting the uniqueness of the local industry and marine industry, and sort of making sure that that's highlighted and figuring out ways to kind of work with that community and see the value of those trade and those skills locally. Any other economic pieces that we might want to highlight in this section? The earliest comments around kind of local stores or, local economy, I think that was coming out of economic, that would. Everyone is tired and we're almost done. All right, we're just going to do it. Here we go, 14. Protecting water infrastructure, protect and preserve water quality and quantity from drought, extreme heat, and other hazards exacerbated climate change. This really is meant to align with what's already in the utilities element. So not trying to kind of create new systems, but just want to make sure that those connections to climate are clear. So any thoughts or pieces or how to make that more specific or? Yeah. Sometimes called LID. Yeah, low impact development. Sometimes there's no one term that everyone agrees on.
And they reflected some of the discussions we've had.
Right. We did it. Well, hearing loud and clear that there's opportunity for consolidation. So we'll be working on that for our findings. So it will look different and it will look shorter the next time you see it. And we'll make it clear as to where pieces go that shifted out to other areas, but super appreciate the information. And
So
yeah.
we would we expect people to be sending in edits if they?
Yeah. Do folks feel like they want to kind of spend a couple more days just looking at it after this conversation and weighing in? I'm happy to leave it up for a few more days for folks. You got your comments in? I think we get good comments here from others.
I just wanted to make sure that I was kind of checking off the ones that were focusing on underrepresented communities.
Yeah.
So I was paying attention to that.
Perfect. Okay. We'll leave it open.
Well-
We don't have a picture of this group. I don't know if that would be appropriate. Would you want a picture of this group for,
Hey, the question was asked if we want to have a picture of the climate team. How do people feel about being in a photo so you could be a part of their comprehensive plan marketing in the final report? Oh, no.
All right, Eddie or anybody else that's online, it looks like we're done for tonight. So you can head out. Thanks for listening in for the whole time.
Cool. Thanks, Marcus.
thanks, Marcus. Bye.
Everyone, good night.